Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. I hope you're having a wonderful Christmas day. It's Christmas evening. We've had a new episode of Doctor Who. We've had the first festive episode since 2017, I think, in the church on Ruby Road, which is finished within the last half an hour. And as promised, here's my thoughts on it. Now, I thought I'd be doing a fairly long video on this. I wasn't sure whether I was going to do it tonight or whether I was going to do it tomorrow. But as it turns out, there's not really a great deal to say about this episode because it was clearly set up with two main imperatives: to set up properly the new Doctor Ncuti Gatwa and to introduce his new companion, Ruby Sunday, played by Millie Gibson. Everything else was just like a Christmas tree, decorations around the core idea of reintroducing the series to people who perhaps have gone away over the last few years, and specifically, and quite importantly, I think, the new Disney Plus audience across the world who probably aren't very familiar with Doctor Who. They may have heard of it, they know roughly what it's about, but they haven't ever had the opportunity to get involved with it, or perhaps have thought, this has been around for 60 years, this is going to be too much for me to get my head around. This was an episode a bit like Rose, back in 2005, that abandoned all that, didn't make the audience worry about all that. It just introduced you to this very charismatic, energetic new leading man as he meets up his new leading lady. And it struck me watching this episode that this is the show that gave us things like the Robots of Death. This is the show that gave us the universe-destroying entropy of Logopolis. This is the series that gave us the Caves of Androzani. This is the series that's given us Blink, The Empty Child, Midnight. And yet this couldn't be further away from any of those episodes, any of those stories. This is still Doctor Who, but a very, very different Doctor Who. Very cleverly, I think, very sensibly reimagined for a very different generation. It's a different generation to the one that started watching in 2005. This is a generation that has TikTok and Instagram and Snapchat and YouTube. And it's I wouldn't say it was aimed at that audience, but it had that sort of pace and energy, clearly intended to appeal to a younger audience in a way. And that's, as it should be, that's absolutely fine. And it also appealed to me, who is not part of the younger audience. It is an episode that's going to be divisive. I think it's possibly going to be an era that's going to be divisive. And this, I think, is going to be an era which is finally going to shake off some of those fans who've been saying for the last 3 or 4 years, Doctor Who is dead, Doctor Who RIP. I think they're going to walk away from a series that is reimagined like this. And that's absolutely fine because, to be honest, they're a pain in the arse most of the time. They're fans that are clinging on to the classic era of Doctor Who and want this era of Doctor Who to be like that. But there's less chance of it being like that now than there has ever been. This is a story then that purely exists to set up the Doctor and Ruby, how they come together, how they meet, how, in a way, their destinies are forged together. And it's quite amusing that the Doctor, in the specials, saying he didn't believe in destiny but felt it was coming for Donna Noble. This was an episode that seemed to predicate on the idea that the Doctor and Ruby are destined to come together in a way. The story itself, in terms of the protagonist, if you like, it's a very thin story, let's face it. It's about Ruby being abandoned 19 years ago outside a church in Ruby Road in London, Bristol. How she's celebrating Christmas with her foster family, or adopted family, who've just taken on board a new baby called Lulabelle. Baby disappears, the Doctor arrives on the scene, and he and Ruby find themselves aboard the Goblin King's spaceship, ship that's above London, above the clouds, scooping up babies for the Goblin King to eat. And that's pretty much it. The Doctor and Ruby are captured, they escape, they take the baby home, and the Doctor eventually defeats the Goblin King as it returns. And that's really all there is to it. It's a wafer thin plot. But it doesn't matter because I think it had to be, because it was about establishing this Doctor and establishing this new girl and how they mesh and can work together, and how in the traditions of the great Russell T Davies character, she becomes sort of fascinated by this extraordinary man who's come into her life. So in terms of the story, there's very little to say. And that will be a shock to a lot of fans who like Doctor Who to be a little bit deeper and a little bit more profound and a little bit more eclectic and mysterious. But I think for a first new episode of a new Doctor introducing a new companion, I think it worked very, very well. I don't think it's an episode that you'll go back and watch again and again, because there really is very little to it. But I think the core of it is that you have a very energetic, very youthful new team in charge of the TARDIS. This is Ncuti Gatwa's first full episode as the Doctor, and he commands the episode. He takes the role, and I think he gives it a lot of energy, a lot of heft, a little bit of emotion when necessary, when he talks about being an orphan, being abandoned, which I particularly love because, of course, a lot of the more mature Doctor Who fans have been screaming and wailing about the Timeless Child arc ever since it was introduced a few years ago, demanding that it's retconned and ignored. But Russell T Davies, no, he's given them the two fingers, and he's saying, no, that's part of Doctor Who's lore, we're going along with it. And that's absolutely as it should be, because if you man babies don't like it, there's no reason to will it out of existence. It is part of the Doctor's DNA. And I think this fits in quite nicely with Ruby, who's very similarly been abandoned. She doesn't know who her mother is. And there's that little thread as well that she can't find out who her parents are. There's that nice little gimmick of using Davina McCall, who has this TV series, Long Lost Family, which explores the genealogy of people and tries to find out about their parents. But they're not able to do it for Billy's character, Ruby, and that could be something which I think will return throughout the series. And I quite like the idea that the Doctor and Ruby are very similar now. You've got these two people travelling together who don't know the full history of their backgrounds. They don't know where they come from. And that's the thing which I think will bind them together and keep them close together. And there's not really a lot more to say in a way. I think Millie Gibson, of course, she's a force of nature, clearly. I haven't seen her in Coronation Street. I've never seen her act, but she did impress me in this. She, excellent performance. You really believed in this girl. And this is something that Russell does very well. He establishes his characters with good, naturalistic, slick dialogue. You got all the sense with the mother and the grandmother. They sort of worked as those sort of believable modern characters living in this situation. And I think it was quite poignant when the goblins affect time. They go back in time and change things so that Ruby disappeared. The family have no idea who Ruby is, and her mother is quite sort of dejected about her life, whereas the mother in Ruby's timeline is joyous, and Ruby has made her life and she loves her life as a foster mother. Without Ruby, she's this dejected, sad, depressed woman who only fosters for the money and has very little joy in life. And I think, I suppose you could stretch the point by saying that the Doctor being in people's lives gives them a bit more joy and brings them alive more. And I think that's sort of perhaps the theme that they were referencing there. So it's an interesting start, certainly in terms of the story. It's worlds away from classic Doctor Who, as it should be, and yet it still feels like Doctor Who. It's very odd. It's odd in that the series is able to do this again and again, reinvent itself and re-energize itself. And sometimes it does that and it goes down, dark alleys that it shouldn't go down. Sometimes it goes to cul-de-sacs that, it has to turn back from. But it's always moving forward and always changing, and I think that's what it needed. I think, much as I enjoyed Jodie Whittaker's era and these specials that we've had, it needs to sort of move in different areas to find a different audience and embrace its past, but not be a slave to it. And I think that's perhaps what a lot of fans have trouble doing. They have their memories of when Doctor Who was exactly what they wanted it to be. When it isn't that anymore, they can't let that go, and they scream that they want that back again. But Doctor Who, and the character himself, doesn't really have time to look back. It has to move forward. As a Christmas special, I think it hit the spot. It was very festive, although it wasn't overly Christmassy. It wasn't obsessed with Christmas, but of course it's all set around Christmas. But it had a lightness about it and a fleetness of foot, which I think it needs to do. You can't really dump a big, heavy science fiction episode on a Christmas Day audience, because that's not what Christmas Day TV is about. Christmas Day TV is about being fairly frothy and not exactly disposable, but not too heavy on the brain, because people don't want that sort of stuff. They want something fairly light, and I think that's what this was. In terms of Doctor Who Christmas special, I much prefer things like the Christmas Invasion, which had a certain darkness to it, but was also quite festive. Some of David Tennant's Christmas specials have been superb. This was in that sort of vein, but I think there wasn't quite enough meat to it to really, as I say, stand up to repeated viewings and to, go to those heights of those earlier Russell T Davies Christmas specials. But it was joyous fun. I mean, I had a great time watching it. I really enjoyed it. I rattled along with it. In the back of my mind all the time thinking, the man babies really aren't going to like this, because they will find box ticking things where there was very little in this episode. There was nothing that made you go, oh, here we go. It was very much Doctor Who telling a rattling Doctor Who story, a good, slick, fast script. The Goblin King stuff I thought was good fun for what it was, and I liked the musical number, the extended musical number. And when it became obvious that the Doctor and Ruby were going to start singing, I thought, oh, how's this going to go? But it just worked. It worked in a weird way that no other series could get away with it. So all in all, I really enjoyed this. Very lightweight, very frothy, as it needs to be for Christmas Day. Very promising new starts from Ncuti Gatwa and Millie Gibson. I think that they clearly have a chemistry there. He's full of energy, he's full of life, and I think the best is yet to come from this pairing. That's the Doctor Who special, which is finished within the last hour, so I wanted to get a review up fairly quickly. So let me know what you thought of it. It's still sort of churning around in my head, but there are mysteries there. You've got Mrs. Flood, the nosy next-door neighbour character played by Anita Dobson, who in a mid-credit sequence clearly knows what a TARDIS is, so who can she be? So yeah, it's seeding mysteries, seeding little things, as Doctor Who always does under Russell T Davies. It's a promising and confident start in terms of the production, in terms of the quality of the script. But I hope we've got meatier stories coming along, and I'm absolutely sure we will. As an introductory story, as a Christmas episode, perfectly fine. And I'm going to give it 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed it. I'm not going to rush back and watch it. I'll watch it again this week, because that's what I do with Doctor Who. But it's not one that I'll think, you must watch that one again. So, yeah, let me know what you thought. Leave a comment down below. Slightly disappointingly, we had a very interesting-looking trailer from the series. It's not until May. That's disappointed me a little, because I thought March would be a perfect time for it. But especially because in May, you're heading into the summer, and I think, although overnight viewing figures and viewing figures generally aren't a big thing anymore, I think the show risks losing a bit of audience, having a 5-month gap. Having introduced the Doctor, I think leaving it 5 months seems a bit long. I'd rather see it sooner. But there we are. We had to wait a year or so for the Tennant special, so I'm sure we can wait a few more months for Ncuti's first run. Let me know what you thought. Leave a comment down below, and like and subscribe, of course. Before I go, still on the subject of Doctor Who, of course, I've just discovered within the last half an hour, very sad news for classic Doctor Who fans and the history of classic Doctor Who, that the actor Richard Franklin apparently passed away this morning. You will remember him, hopefully, as Captain Mike Yates throughout the John Pertwee era of Doctor Who, one of the mainstays of UNIT in that period where the Doctor was earthbound, sort of the Brigadier's right-hand man, and sort of potentially spun as a potential love interest for Jo Grant, played by Katie Manning. Passed away early this morning. He'd been ill for some time. I know he was very ill last year, and came out of hospital. I don't know what happened, but he passed away this morning. So slightly bittersweet that we have a new era of Doctor Who starting as we lose one of its sort of classic cast. So yeah, just thought I'd mention that in case that hadn't come to your attention yet. So yeah, the excitement of a new Doctor Who era, and the sadness of the passing of a figure from the show's long history. Right, that's me done. Thank you for watching. Apologies if this review has been slightly jumbled, because of course I've just watched the episode and I wanted to get on and do a review quickly rather than do it tomorrow. But yeah, let me know what you thought of it. I know it's going to be divisive, but even though it felt like Doctor Who at the end of the day, and what more can you ask for? It's a different sort of Doctor Who. It's a younger skewing Doctor Who, probably. But I think my only concern is that we've got this long wait, so the momentum might sort of peter out a little bit. But, it is what it is. We'll see Doctor Who back in May. Right, I'm out of here. Enjoy the rest of your Christmas holiday period. I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.